Snow was falling the night Mercy Callahan knocked on the back door of the Bar W Ranch and asked the cook for scraps. Not a meal. Not a plate. Just scraps. Whatever was left in the pot after the men had eaten. Whatever the dogs wouldn't finish. She stood there with her coat too thin for the wind, her hands raw and cracked, her eyes fixed on the ground because she could not bear to look anyone in the face while she begged. Behind her, wrapped in a shawl that had more holes than wool, stood her daughter, 6 years old, silent, hollow-cheeked, holding her mother's skirt like it was the only solid thing left in the world. If you feel that ache in your chest already, that tightening behind your ribs, stay with me. This story is for you. And before we go further, if stories like this move something in you, something tender and true, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. It helps this little story find the hearts it's meant for. Mercy hadn't always been a woman who begged. 3 years back she'd been a rancher's wife in Colorado, married young to a man named Thomas Callahan who loved her plain and steady, the way good men do. They'd had a small herd, a small house, and a daughter named Ivy who laughed like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was enough. Then Thomas got thrown from a horse breaking a young colt, and 3 days later he was gone. The ranch went to his brother by law and custom, and his brother's wife made it clear, in the coldest words a woman can use, that there was no place in that house for a widow and a fatherless girl. Mercy took what she could carry, took Ivy's hand, and started walking toward whatever came next. What came next was 2 years of small towns and smaller kindnesses. She sewed dresses when there was work. She scrubbed floors when there wasn't. She sold her wedding ring in a town called Prosperity, which she thought was the cruelest joke God ever told, and used the money to keep Ivy fed through a hard winter. She learned to swallow her pride because pride doesn't fill a child's stomach. By the time she reached the outskirts of Marshall's Bend and the sprawling acres of the Bar W Ranch, she had exactly 11 cents to her name and a daughter who hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. Pride was the last thing on her mind. Survival was the only thing left. The cook, a broad woman named Nettie with flour on her apron and suspicion in her eyes, was ready to send them off with nothing. Charity cases came through often enough, and Nettie had learned to guard the kitchen like it was her own child. But before she could speak, a voice came from behind her, low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Nettie. Set 2 more plates. Caleb Whitfield stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, hat still on his head, boots still dusted from the barn, looking at the woman and child on his back step like he was looking at something that mattered. He was a tall man, wide through the shoulders from years of ranch work, with a face that had gone quiet a long time ago and stayed that way. Folks in town said he hadn't smiled proper since his wife Sarah died birthing a son who didn't live past his first breath. That was 4 years gone now. 4 years of Caleb running the biggest ranch in the county alone, speaking only when necessary, and keeping his grief folded up tight where nobody could see it. Mercy stumbled over her words. Sir, we don't need a plate, just whatever's left over, whatever the dogs won't eat, we'll be grateful for anything. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at Ivy, at her thin wrists and her 2 big eyes, and something moved behind his own eyes, something old and buried. Nobody eats scraps at my table, he said. Come in out of the cold. That single sentence changed everything. Inside, the kitchen was warm from the stove, smelling of beans and cornbread and coffee, and Mercy had to press her lips together hard to keep from crying at the smell alone. Caleb didn't make a show of his kindness. He didn't ask questions while they ate. He simply set down 2 full plates, a real feast compared to what they'd known, and let them eat in peace while he sat at the far end of the table pretending to read an old newspaper, giving them the dignity of not being watched too closely. Ivy ate like she'd forgotten food could taste good. Mercy ate slower, watching her daughter, tears sitting right behind her eyes the whole time, grateful and ashamed in equal measure, the way proud people often feel when kindness comes uninvited. When the meal was done, Caleb spoke again, still not quite looking at her directly, the way careful men do when they're offering something bigger than words. Storm's coming in tonight. Bad one. You won't make it to town before it hits. There's a room off the back of the bunkhouse, small, but it's warm and it's got a good door. You're welcome to it till the weather clears. Mercy wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her that accepting more kindness meant owing more than she could ever repay, that men who were generous to strange women usually wanted something in return. She'd learned that lesson hard on the road, learned to be wary of soft words from men. But Ivy was already half asleep against her arm, worn thin from walking, and outside the wind was picking up in a way that promised danger. So Mercy nodded, quiet and careful, and let herself be led to a small room that smelled of cedar and old blankets, warmer than anywhere they'd slept in weeks. That night the storm came in hard, snow driving sideways, wind screaming around the corners of the ranch house like something alive and angry. Mercy lay awake listening to it, Ivy curled against her side, and she thought about how strange it was to feel safe, even for one night, even in a stranger's house. She didn't know that down the hall, Caleb Whitfield lay awake too, staring at the ceiling of a house that had felt empty for 4 long years, thinking about the way a little girl had looked at a plate of food like it was a miracle, thinking about her mother's tired eyes that still held something fierce and unbroken underneath all that hardship. He didn't know yet that he was already starting to care. Men like Caleb never see it coming until it's already happened. Morning came gray and cold, the storm passed but the world buried in snow, and Caleb found Mercy already up, already trying to make herself useful, sweeping the kitchen floor before anyone woke. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I don't take charity without earning it," Mercy answered, not looking up from the broom. "Never have. Never will." Something in her voice told him this wasn't pride talking. It was survival, the kind that gets carved into a person's bones after enough hard years. He studied her a moment, then made a decision the way ranchers make decisions, plain and practical. "I need help in the house. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Nettie's got more work than 2 women could handle, and my hands are needed outside. You stay through the winter, you work for your keep. Room and board for you and the girl. Come spring, if you want to move on, no one stops you." It wasn't charity, not in the way she feared. It was an offer of dignity, work traded fair for shelter, and Mercy felt something in her chest loosen just slightly for the first time in years. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why help us at all?" Caleb was quiet a moment, looking out the window at the snow-covered fields that used to hold his wife's laughter. "Because nobody should have to ask for scraps," he said. "Not in this life. Not while I've got a full table." She stayed. The weeks that followed moved slow and gentle, the way healing does when it's real. Mercy worked hard, cooking meals that filled the whole house with warmth, mending clothes, keeping the home steady in a way it hadn't been steady in years. Ivy, once so quiet and withdrawn, began to laugh again, chasing barn cats across the yard, following Caleb around while he did chores, asking him 100 questions a day about horses and cattle and why the sky turned orange at night. Caleb, a man who had gone silent after loss, found himself answering every single one of those questions with more patience than he knew he had left in him. He started carving her a small wooden horse in the evenings, quiet work done by lamplight, his big rough hands moving careful and slow over the wood. One evening Mercy found him sitting by the fire, the little carved horse nearly finished in his hands, and she sat down across from him without asking, something she wouldn't have dared do weeks before. "You're good with her," she said softly. "Better than most men who aren't even blood." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "Had a boy once. Never got to be good with him. Never got the chance." Mercy's breath caught. She hadn't known, not the details, only the rumors from town about a wife lost and grief that never quite lifted. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said, voice rough but not unkind. "Some things you carry doesn't mean you stop living." It was the most he'd said about his pain since she'd arrived, and something passed between them in that quiet firelit room, not words exactly, but understanding, the kind that grows between 2 people who have both known loss and are both still standing despite it. Trust built slowly after that, the way it does between careful people. Not through grand gestures, but through small things. Caleb fixing the loose hinge on her door without being asked. Mercy leaving coffee ready before he woke each morning. Him teaching Ivy to ride the gentlest mare on the ranch, walking beside her with a steady hand on the saddle, patient as spring rain. Her sitting with him some evenings, not speaking much, just being present, letting the quiet between them feel less lonely than it used to. Then came the trouble. It started with whispers in town, ugly ones, about the widow living at the Bar W with no husband and no papers to prove her story true. Caleb's late wife's cousin, a hard woman named Regina Coyle, had long coveted a piece of the Whitfield land for her own husband's failing ranch, and she saw opportunity in scandal. She began spreading talk that Caleb was keeping a woman improperly, that decent folks shouldn't do business with a man harboring loose morals under his roof, that the bank should reconsider extending credit to a rancher living in sin. The talk grew teeth. The bank, nervous about reputation, threatened to call in Caleb's loan early, the one he needed to survive until spring cattle sales. Losing that loan meant losing decades of his family's land. Caleb faced Regina in town, jaw set hard, voice low and dangerous in a way Mercy had never heard from him. "You'll not use a grieving widow and a hungry child to steal what isn't yours," he said. "I'd burn this ranch to ash before I'd let you have it built on their suffering." But words alone couldn't stop the bank's fear, and for a few terrible days it seemed everything Caleb had built might slip away, taking with it the only real home Mercy and Ivy had found in years. Mercy, watching him carry that weight silently, finally spoke the truth she'd been avoiding since the night she first knocked on his kitchen door. "Marry me," she said one evening, her voice shaking but certain. "Not for love, not to trap you into something you don't want. Marry me so the bank sees a respectable household, so Regina's lies lose their teeth. I'll release you from it the moment your land is safe, I swear it." Caleb looked at her a long moment, firelight catching the steadiness in his eyes. "I don't want a marriage of convenience," he said quietly. "Not with you." Mercy's heart stumbled. "What do you want then?" "I want it real," he said, voice rough with feeling he'd kept buried 4 long years. "I want a wife who chooses me because she wants to, not because a bank forced her hand. I've watched you fight for that girl every single day since you walked onto my land. I've watched you turn my empty house into a home again. I'm not asking you to save my ranch, Mercy. I'm asking you to stay. For good. Because I love you plain and I love that girl like she's my own." Tears spilled freely down Mercy's face then, years of guarded walls finally breaking. "I was so afraid to need anyone again," she whispered. "So afraid of being left with nothing, twice." "You'll never go hungry again," Caleb said, taking her hands in his rough ones. "Not you. Not Ivy. Not while I've got breath in me." They married quietly 2 weeks later in the ranch house parlor, just the preacher, Nettie, and a handful of ranch hands who'd come to love the little family that had grown under that roof. Ivy stood between them in a new blue dress Mercy had sewn by lamplight, holding a small bouquet of winter greenery, beaming with a joy that had been missing from her small face for far too long. Regina's schemes fell apart within the month, her lies exposed when the bank saw the marriage was real and lasting, built on genuine devotion rather than desperation. The loan was renewed. The ranch was saved. But more than that, a family was born from ashes that had seemed like nothing but loss. That spring, as the snow melted and the fields turned green again, Ivy ran through the yard chasing new lambs, laughing loud and free, and when she fell and scraped her knee, she didn't call for her mother first. She looked up at Caleb, tears in her eyes, and said the word that broke him open completely. "Papa, it hurts." Caleb knelt down without a moment's hesitation, gathering her into his arms, holding her the way he'd once dreamed of holding a son he never got the chance to raise. Mercy stood in the doorway watching, hand pressed to her heart, tears falling freely, finally understanding that home wasn't a place at all. Home was people who choose to stay, who choose you back, who turn strangers into family one quiet act of kindness at a time. That winter Mercy had asked a stranger for scraps, expecting nothing, hoping only to survive one more cold night. Instead she found a feast that never ended, a table always set, a home that would never turn her away, and a love that filled every hungry, hollow place inside her until there was nothing left but peace. If this story warmed something inside you tonight, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in this world, that love can find you even in your hardest hour, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part of Mercy and Caleb's story touched you most. Subscribe if you love slow, tender stories of healing and second chances, because there are so many more waiting to be told, and I'd love to share the next one with you soon.